So what we are going to speak is the home context of the migration. And as you see, we are speaking about the Romanian Roma at home. But of course, this is also having a metaphoric sense that Romanian Roma are at home in large. So that's how we are going to present. And what is the main question, as some of you already put this in this sense, that is it sufficient to attribute the migration, what is happening recently, to the poverty and discrimination? Are these the main driving forces, or are these sufficient to explain things? Or should we do better to explain migration in a broader sense, and not to speak just about migration of Roma, but not the Roma migration, but migration of the Roma within the context of the Romanian migration and in general. So our research was spread all across the landscape. As you can see, there are 5 localities on the map. There is in the south in Yalomița County, there is in the middle in Brașov County, then there are 3 in Transylvania. Brașov is also in Transylvania, sorry. In Cluj County, Zalău, and in Bihor. So these are the 3 sites, and 2 of them are villages with a large Roma population, Roma settlement, separated from the majority, and 3 of them are small towns where the Roma either are living in between the majority or also having a separate settlement. The selection for the country for the sites was preconditioned by a set of indicators what we generated, actually Steffi generated from the previous research about how much is the settlement developed or underdeveloped, if there is certain risk of poverty, or there were projects implemented by NGOs or government agencies. So that was the first step. And then there was a local data gathering using a survey method, which used, of course, the general demographic indicators from the population census, but also we relied on the knowledge of the local Roma assistant in providing us a better assessment of how who the Roma are. And actually what happened that during the survey, those people who are originally assigned as belonging to the Roma community by the local assistant rarely refused in the questionnaire to the question that what is your ethnicity. So it is a combination of local knowledge and self-identification of the people. And what is particular about this, if you compare that our sample, which is in red, is usually in the 2 villages, the first one, Baratka and Bihal, the second, is significantly higher than the census data regarding the Roma. So that shows that much more people consider themselves Roma in a cozy situation when there is not, they are not in the risk of discrimination because they are just among themselves. And 2 samples in this sense are total in the villages. So all households were visited by the local assistant, and it was completed the questionnaire with them. And 3 later small towns, there was a procedure of sampling. So the Roma are large part of the Roma population was included into this survey. And what we found in the questionnaire, that there are different patterns of mobility. So, for example, this is from the southern Romanian part. There is a strong movement to Spain, and then to Great Britain and Italy and Germany. And you see this the stronger the line is, the more the people are moving. And in other situation, there was a movement from Cluj County also to Spain and to Great Britain, and then to Portugal, Italy, and to Central European countries, and then to Ireland also. This is a more diversified movement, as you can observe, and this is a third locality with the movement which is again quite diverse. This later I just hand over the to provide some explanation for this, because of course what we observed need an explanation. And here I stop and ask Steffi to take over the microphone.
Here are these maps. In fact, covers a longer or shorter period of time. So we asked our subjects to tell us when was the first time they traveled abroad, and when was the last time they traveled abroad, so we could see the differences between localities, and we could identify some patterns depending on these types of localities. And we saw that in some cases, for example, in I can go back. In one of the towns, for example, in Banyod, the Roma persons or families started to migrate even before 2007. But compared to the two rural localities, the situation was different, because in these rural localities, the Roma families started to migrate only after 2007. And the explanation can be different depending on the localities, but in these two cases, we could identify the causes. It was not the EU accession of Romania and how easy became to travel abroad, but the economic crisis, which was felt very accentuated in these rural areas. A lot of factories left the region. A lot of the construction of the highway stopped in these years, so people practically remained without any other options. Even the informal sector was shortened, because some of the jobs that usually were practiced by the Roma people started to be occupied by the majority population, the Hungarians and the Romanians. So we tried also to identify what can be one of the reasons why people started to leave, and we saw that as regards the income of the households, the situation differs very much from that of the majority population, because only 12% of the local Roma households had salaries. So money, incomes coming from contractual work. All the others, for example, almost more than half of our sample relied on daily labor or had access to different social benefits, child benefits, and they were subjects of the minimum guaranteed income. And we can see also that as they told us, 21% of the households received money from abroad, from their families or relatives working abroad. And this is an underestimation of the of the money, of the remittances received from abroad, because when we see how the families spend the remittances, we can see, I highlighted the rural areas only, that almost all households spend remittances, even if they didn't declared as usual income. And it is also interesting how they spend this, and there are big differences between different localities, because in Bihal they also invest on the education of the children, and compared to Baratka, the other village, where they spend most money on survival eat items, the food, or different household maintenance costs. We observed, this is just a very, very small part of the data that we have, but based on the remaining data also we can observe some patterns, and that one is concerning the time frame of the migration experience, and there are differences between some of the urban areas compared to the rural areas. In urban areas, they started to migrate earlier, 2007. They stayed longer abroad. They traveled usually with their whole family. And these are those families who came back to Romania after 2 or 3 or 5 years of working abroad in Great Britain or Spain. And in rural areas, they started to migrate after 2007, but they stay only for a short period of time, usually during the summer, 2 or 3, 4 months, maybe, and they came back. They usually travel alone, one or most 2 persons from the household without the children. The children are left at home with the grandparents or their neighbors. And the other difference was that there is a connection between previous experiences and future intentions to migrate, because those who stayed longer, they have connections with their relatives also. They don't want to try again this experience, but those from the rural areas who have only recent migration experiences and they don't have enough experience to stay abroad and to know what's happening there, they still want to go again. And of course, you could see earlier on the maps that there are differences between the number of the destination countries, and this is, from my point of view, is one of the most exciting result of the research, because the differences in the number of the destination countries depended mostly on the type of networks they use. From the Gurai and Baratka, they used mostly family networks and ethnic networks, and those were the persons and families who stayed longer abroad. But in one of the villages in Bihar, for example, the Roma persons used trans-ethnic network, their connections to the majority population, because they had a very long history of working together and living together. Even if it's a segregated community, even if there are problems between the majority population and the Roma community, still they maintain contacts. For example, they engage in even in godparentship. So this is one of the ways they can transcend. And in these communities, they had the chance to choose more destination countries, so they are not connected toward 1 or 2 countries. And for more examples, I give the word to Cătălina.
Okay, so if we zoom in one of the localities, we will see that there are like big differences among like the different Roma populations who live in the same locality. I mean, like I did my fieldwork in one town in South Romania, which was kind of a post-agro-industrial town, yeah, where which was affected by the dismantling of factories and collective farms after the fall of the communists. And I could easily say that the main causes of migration, it's like the economic changes which happened after the fall of the communism. Like the town is kind of really struck with a high unemployment. Actually, the whole country where I did the research. And what is yet interesting to see is that the shapes migration took among the two Roma populations living in the same village, and the way remittances coming from migration were invested by the two Roma populations are completely different. So it's kind of very difficult to generalize, and I found it kind of useful in understanding these differences in migration. I'm saying migration, and I'm speaking about networks and the way remittances are invested. So in order to understand these differences, we should kind of understand like local social histories of the populations that we are studying, and also their kind of socio-cultural organization. So in Gurai, where I did the fieldwork, there are like two main populations of Roma. One is a Romani speaker population, which is identified by the others as Ursari, though their kind of traditional occupation was comb making, and there are Țigani Vătrași, which would translate as house-based gypsies or settled gypsies. Well, the first population was semi-nomadic and forcibly sedentarized after the Second World War. The second population does not speak Romani anymore, has been living in houses for quite a while, and are quite similar in their cultural practices to their Romanian neighbors. And the first population, the Ursari, the more conservative, or I wouldn't call them conservative, maybe the Romani-speaking population, have been always living on the outskirts of the town in a segregated area, which was, and during communism, they were even like people living there or even banned from entering the city. It's what the stories in the town say, that there was a physical barrier which did not allow the Roma to enter the city, whereas the other group of Roma people, the Țigani Vătrași, have been living in mixed neighborhoods. And interestingly enough, the way migration happened among the two Roma population was different, whereas the Țigani Ursari had a kinship, followed kinship-based networks. The other Roma migrated in ethnically mixed networks, and their migration, they might be probably assimilated to what, if I refer back to Elena's talk, they might be, probably can be easily assimilated to this invisible Roma, whereas the others, Roma, are the more kind of visible in the migration countries, in the receiving countries. And regarding now the effects of migration, I should probably also mention that Roma from both populations were employed in during communism in the town factories, and it seems that at that time the Ursari Roma had more both financial and social capital, and they were the ones who kind of started migration before the Țigani Vătrași, because somehow they were even if they were territorially segregated, they had this capital which allowed them to be the pioneers of migration in the town. And in what regards the effects of migration, the Ursari Roma, what they mainly wanted to do was to get out of the segregated community, and they started building big houses, like villa-type houses in the city center, and to become strikingly visible, even though they live their lives outside Romania. So there are the houses there, which are for most of the time empty, but which speak about their success in migration. Whereas the Țigan Vătrași, what they invested was rather social mobility, not territorial mobility, but social mobility. I mean, they try to invest a lot in the education of their children, because they kind of want to become Romanian, to become Romanianized. And it's also the case that the Ursari Roma, the Romani speakers, do not really have intentions to come back home, whereas the Țigani Vătrași, because they somehow follow the path of Romanian labor migrants, they could reunite with their families only after after Romania EU accession, like abroad. Yet, because of the economic crisis, they started coming back home, and because they were employed with, like, on contractual basis abroad, they now benefit from pensions from, I don't know, Spain, Italy, and the tendency is to come back home. So this was kind of, I don't know, just a picture of how different populations living in the Roma population living in the same place have different forms of migration. Thank you.
So as you have seen from Cătălina's presentation, also the effects are ambiguous, but for example, one is that financial remittances and the local processes are quite observable in other communities as well, like the residential desegregation, which is going on spontaneously, is quite widespread. And there is also an aspect of increasing positive attitude by the authorities toward the migrants who are successful or perceived as successful. And there is also an absent visibility, which means the empty houses, which are owned by the Roma. So, for example, just a couple of pictures from other community where the traditional housing would look like with wooden structures and mud, but you see that there are already new kind of thermic isolations are around, and then people are coming back from, in this case, from England and building houses of brick and using their skills acquired abroad as masons, and this is also recognized by the local community as something that they learned and they are recognized. So this is a changing landscape of the rural Roma settlement that you can see that some of the old houses, but already the new houses, and even the main street of the village is becoming owned by the Roma, and the only difference between this and the rest of the village, maybe that's more colorful a bit, or that's in style. And the conclusion that what we have found in general, that's a differentiated migration all over in these 5 communities, 5 settlements, that there is one kind of migration, one pattern of migration is more typical to the what Cătălina said about Ursari and the Cortorari, who started earlier, already in the 90s, and they are everywhere now in the Western countries, or there's a diaspora as in the volume the French, the Spanish partners described Cortorari. The other aspect of what we have to mention, that the remittances are shaped by the kind of networks the people have, and those who are migrating in more compact manner, and they are taking more significance in the within the group, so that they have a different style of investing than those who are taking a reference group in the local majority, and they are trying to becoming more similar to the local Hungarians or Romanians in the style also of the houses. But the segregation is going on in both cases. So even those who want to be dissimilar, they want to be in the middle of the village or city. And the last one is just that everywhere Roma becoming increasingly more visible in the communities where the migration has an effect, and this is recognized by the local population as well. So the concept of being at home, it's more like being more recognized at home. Thank you for attention.